Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech, protected.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Being Human. This weekend, I had a chance to watch a television show put on by teens, and it was called Teen News. And whenever I do stumble on it, I watch it. I enjoy watching it. The teenagers do a wonderful job, and it's not like a news show where they're saying, what's happening in the Ukraine, or will Trump be president again? It's not a news show day to day, but what they do is segments on things that teens have trouble with or are concerned about. Alcoholism, smoking, drug addiction, and that kind of thing. Well, they did a whole segment on smoking, and I'm glad they did because they repeated a lot of the things that I tell you about addiction, and it turns out there's a real relationship between addiction and drugs and mental illness, and I'm concerned about mental illness. I'm a board-certified counselor, and I've worked with a lot of people that are mentally ill. So I was very interested in what they had to say, and they decided to tell the teenagers why not to smoke. What happens when you smoke? How do you become addicted to it? And I was really interested in what they said, but they had a doctor talking, and he explained to them this. The teenage brain is rewiring. It's not 100% mature yet. As a matter of fact, your brain does not mature into adulthood until at least age 25, maybe longer. So if you're 12, 13, and 14 years old, you have another 10 years to go before your brain matures. Why is it so slow? Well, it's very complicated. You use your brain for everything, and it's very complicated. So they were talking about the addiction to smoking, and they had a model of the brain, and they drew on it. This is the area that's very sensitive to smoking. And when you start smoking, it may be fun for a while, and then your brain requires more and more and more until you become addicted. And when you become addicted and you don't smoke because maybe you want to get off smoking, maybe you don't want to smoke for the rest of your life, then the withdrawal starts. And the withdrawal lasts for about a month if you don't smoke. And the withdrawal symptoms are very intense cravings for cigarettes, intense cravings for food. It just multiplies what you want to do tenfold. Now, different drugs have different rates and different symptoms of withdrawal. Some within a few hours you have withdrawal symptoms, and they last for a certain amount of time. It's not the same for every drug, and we may well get into that as time goes on because I will be going through the drugs. But you have to remember, and this was the main point, if you're 13 or 14 years old, it's very, very easy to become addicted to smoking. And you think it's the adult thing to do. All adults smoke. And I can remember being a college student, and the college students thought it was so cool. They would get their cigarettes out and they would smoke in the dining hall and so forth, and they thought it was wonderful and mature. But what it is actually doing, it is actually narrowing your blood vessels. Smoking does intense damage to your blood vessels, and it's very easy to get addicted to it. It's very hard to stop the addiction, and if you do stop it cold turkey, you're not taking medication for it, then what happens is that you go through the withdrawal. It'll take a month to get over it. Now, eventually, of course, those symptoms will fade. They won't be as intense as they were before, but students talk about gaining weight because they can't stop eating, just craving is more and more. You know what it's like if you're going past a McDonald's something and you get a yearning for a cheeseburger or something. Boy, I can just imagine what that cheeseburger tastes like. I can feel it in my brain. I can taste it in my brain. I want that cheeseburger. And so you stop and you eat. And that satisfies that craving, but that's a mild craving. But if you stop to think of craving something that you can't have, over and over again, and it just multiplies, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, then you think you're not going to survive without that hamburger, if that was the case. But it is the case with smoking. I got to have that cigarette. When I wake up, I have to have that cigarette. When I go to bed, I have to have that cigarette. And they're buying cigarettes, and all the time that that's happening, they're damaging all of their blood vessels. Now, I also want to tell you that there's such a thing called Buerger's disease. It's not spelled exactly the same as a burger as you go out to a restaurant to get one. It's like, I think, you Buergers. But Buerger's disease is a fatal disease. You can only get it if you're smoking. You can only get rid of it if you stop smoking. And I know a girl that died of it. It is fatal. What happens is that the blood vessels become so narrowed, squeezed so tight, that you don't get circulation. And then what happens? You have necrosis set in. That's when the organ or whatever else in your body is suffering from that. It gets to the point where it doesn't have circulation. The circulation stops. And then what happens is it turns black and it drops off. I've seen cases where a person has lost toes and has lost part of a foot. The foot has turned black, and it's not a case of amputating it medically. It's a case of it just drops off. It has no circulation, and all of the cells are dead, and they turn black. Now, I've watched some shows where they discuss that. I've watched some shows with plastic surgery where a guy wants his nose to be bigger, but he's had several nose surgeries already, and the doctors tell him, if you get any more surgery and you get an infection, the circulation will stop, your entire nose will drop off. Now, my sister told me about when she was working as a nurse's aide about a patient. This was years ago. They didn't have the medications they have now to increase circulation, and part of the toes died. And they died, and they turned black, and that would be gangrene, of course, and then it just dropped off. And so eventually enough drops off so that you die. You don't have enough circulation to maintain your body. And as I said, I know a friend of mine that I had met who died of Buerger's disease. He wouldn't stop smoking. I had another friend that was going through heart issues like I go through heart issues, and he wouldn't stop smoking because I've never smoked at all, so that's to my advantage. I would never get the disease, but I do have cardiac problems. But this man had cardiac problems, vascular problems, and if he didn't stop smoking, he had about 2.5 years to live. He couldn't stop smoking. It was just so hard to do it. Every so often he had to go out and he had to get a cigarette, and he kept smoking, and he died in about 2.5 years. It is fatal. If you smoke, not every smoker gets it, but if you smoke, it is fatal. It is a fatal disease. Now, in terms of the teen brain is still developing at age 13, 14, and 15, and it's rewiring. Now, what happens to a brain if it's just still growing and you add an injury to it or you stop circulation to it? You start to get brain damage. And you get brain damage and you stop the circulation in the periphery first, your hands, your feet, your toes, and so forth. That goes first. Then later on, other parts of the body, you can lose a leg, you can lose an arm, but there's no circulation. So necrosis means the lack of circulation, gangrene sets in, and you die eventually because your body cannot sustain itself because it has no circulation to do that. That comes from smoking. You don't get Buerger's disease in any other way except through smoking, and you can't stop it in any other way except to stop smoking and hope that you haven't done so much damage to your system that it can't recover from it. So you need to keep in mind when you smoke that the nicotine is very easy to get addicted to, and you need more and more of it as time goes on. And so and I also want to mention here about smoking that some smoke right after surgery. The addiction can be so strong. As I said, I have cardiac problems, and I was going in for an open heart surgery, which I had successfully. And I went to a big hospital. It's in the state of New Hampshire. It went through a big hospital, and they have one building. All it does is handle cardiac cases. And there was a man that was outside. He was wearing a hospital Johnny, so you know he was a patient. He was wearing the patient Johnny that everybody hates. And what was he doing? He was outside the cardiac unit of that hospital smoking a cigarette. And I know of some people who, as soon as they get out of surgery, the first thing they ask for is a cigarette. It is that hard to get out of it. It's harder than heroin, and it's harder from some other hard drugs. Now, I want to mention here about suicide as well. Drug addiction and suicide are related. And I know a lot of people will say that suicide is only done by people who are mentally ill. And I know that some people are mentally ill. There's not any question in my mind that some people are mentally ill. But there are some people that are not mentally ill, and they choose to do suicide as an end point of whatever they're going through. Now, whatever they're going through, they are distressed, they're upset about it, they don't think they can make a change, and so therefore they look at suicide as an answer. Addiction is one of the things that people think that they should commit suicide because they cannot get off the smoking or they cannot get off the drugs. Now, suicide is always the wrong choice, but not everybody that commits suicide is mentally ill. Yes, they are all distressed. Yes, they are all upset about something, but suicide is a rational choice. It has to be a rational choice. You decide to do it. You decide to say yes to it. And if you can say yes to it, you can say no to it. And I tell patients that all the time. If you can say yes to suicide, you can say no to suicide. You could also say no to drug addiction. I'm not saying it's an easy road. It's not an easy road. But you can say no to drugs. You can say no to suicide. And I know people that have done that. I did a seminar once for teenagers and children in a church. I was asked to do a suicide seminar. I do them every so often. And so I did the suicide seminar, and usually when you do a seminar, there's always somebody there that's planning to commit suicide. And as it turns out, I prevented 3 teenagers from doing suicide the time I did that seminar for them. And some of them came to me for counseling later. You don't have to say that it's beyond me, I can't control it, so therefore my end is to jump off the bridge or something like that. There's no way that you can do that. Also, suicides require a lot of planning. They plan how they're going to do it. They plan when they're going to do it. They plan the methods of doing it, where they're going to be when it happens, and what's going to happen to the things that they own, and are they leaving something behind that they don't want to leave behind, because it means leaving everything behind. You don't have to commit suicide. You don't have to lose hope. There is always help available, and it is a hard road, but you can do it. So remember, teenagers' brains are not mature. It's easy for an addiction to occur in a teenage brain that's rewiring and still growing. You don't want to ruin your life by having substances in your system that are going to hurt your system. So you can make a decision. If you can say yes to drugs, you can say no to drugs. And so I'm urging that you will say no to drugs, because there's no way that you want to ruin your life. And when you get over it and all of those symptoms have passed, you can look back on it and see how much you've accomplished. It's like looking down a mountain and seeing how much you've actually climbed, a lot more than you think, with a lot more success than you can even imagine. So we're coming to a close in terms of time. We'll continue with this next time, and I will deal more with drugs, and I'll be adding things about suicide and depression as we go along, because there's a definite link between addiction and suicide and mental illness and suicide. A lot of them are intertwined, and I want to be able to get to how they become intertwined. So we'll close it here. Thank you for watching. Until next time.